Back to the second session, the afternoon session of this symposium on crafting the South Louisiana sound, featuring people who have been involved in making instruments for Cajun and Creole music in South Louisiana. And we have with us this afternoon what may be too many people. We'll see if we can get through everybody. Representing on the one hand the violin making tradition with Anya Burgess and Chris Segura. And Chris is, I guess, this is about apprenticeship. Chris is technically Anya's apprentice, but she sure doesn't look old enough to have an apprentice, I can tell you. I mean that in the nicest way. It happens. And we also have several accordion makers. The accordions, as usual, are going to drown out the fiddles. We'll see about that. But Tina Pellioni, who learned her craft in Mark Savoie's workshop, I guess, has been working with, as did Mark as well, with my dear friend Moisey Baudouin from Delcom. And here we have a situation where the situation is reversed. We have an apprentice who is we have a master who is considerably younger than the apprentice. And we'll talk about them some more in a minute. And then we have Larry Miller, who's been making accordions for how long? 35 years. And he's got two of his apprentices here. One was his second, and the other is his his most recent one. This is Jay Miller and Craig Vincent. And we're going to just sort of have a conversation about not only learning but making these remarkable instruments. And I thought we would start with the violins, if that's okay. Or fiddle, yes. Here it comes. The on button is right there. There you go. So maybe you want to tell a little bit about how you got interested in this to begin with, and where you got, I don't know what you would call it, training or preparation or inspiration or whatever.
Sure. So my name is Anya Burgess. I had the wonderful opportunity to be an apprentice as well as to have an apprentice. And I was in college traveling around Nova Scotia, ended up in Cape Breton, and ended up staying with a violin maker, and kind of became fascinated with the craft through him and his family. He's still an active maker. His name is Otis Thomas. He lives in Bedeque, near Bedeque, Cape Breton, Nova Scotia. And we just became real good friends, played a lot of music together, and for many summers, probably at least 6, I went up there and spent months with him. And in the meantime, I was at Indiana University and stumbled into their violin making program, not intentionally. I didn't think I was making a career out of it at that point.
By the way, just to say, Indiana University, you said a violin making program. That's kind of unusual for a university. They have a remarkable music program, opera, composition, jazz, whatever. But they also have an instrument making program. Is that right?
Yeah. So I was at Indiana to study music and also to study folklore, and was flipping through the course catalog, discovered they had a violin making program, and thought to myself, man, that sounds really cool. I want to sign up. So I did sign up. And there was only 12 people in the program. It's a small workshop. But anyway, so I went through that program, 2-year program. And in the meantime, during the summers, I would go up to Nova Scotia and spend the summer with Otis to kind of supplement my training. So the violin that I have here that I brought with me is the one that I built mostly at school, but finished it with Otis. I did all the varnish work with my teacher, Otis Thomas. He also built for me this tailpiece that has a really cool carving in it. He built the peg. So this instrument is very much a tribute to him, as much as, the instrument, my first instrument that I built. So anyway, so when I decided to go into it on my own, I've been building on my own for probably about 10 years or 8 or 10 years. Chris approached me with the idea that maybe he could study violin making, and there aren't a lot of violin makers in this area, so he came to me and said, hey, how about, are you open to the idea of me doing an apprenticeship with you? And immediate yes to that. I mean,
by the way, I want to say this is totally characteristic of the way instrument makers in South Louisiana across the board have been. Very, very cooperative, very inclusive. If somebody wants to learn, they seem to be mostly willing to show them. I know Mark Salvo, for example, had dozens and dozens of people go through his shop and learn, and same way with violin makers.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, I got so much out of working with Otis Thomas, and he was so free in sharing his information with me. I felt like I had a debt to the world, and so it was just really great.
Give us an example of a bit of information that we might not know about that was important to you.
In terms of building, or, I mean, in terms of the process.
Yeah.
I mean, gosh, there's just so many things that you can learn from somebody directly that you can't figure out on your own with violin making. I mean, everything from carving. All the plates are carved by hand with hand tools. It's not, the top and back are not bent. And so, as you're trying to figure out the shape of the top, the shape of the back, to have somebody right next to you to show you how to, even in your mind, kind of like conceptualize how the top needs to be shaped is amazing. The top is the sounding board of the violin, so it has to be shaped in a very specific way in order for all the movements and frequencies to travel through it in the most efficient way to get the best sound. So it's like, you can't necessarily just go on YouTube and find that information, so it's, everything from sharpening tools. When I did an apprenticeship, because I had done an apprenticeship, I was able to kind of like just mimic it when I was teaching Chris. We started with the very basics, sharpening tools and all that. And so all of that, having somebody next to you to show you how to do that is invaluable.
Chris, you want to talk about how invaluable that was to you?
Well, okay, so I should start off by saying that whenever I started my apprenticeship, at that point in my life, I had never... The extent of my woodworking that I had done up to that point was making this little box in shop class in high school that barely qualified as a box. It's so bad, and I still have it now, so it's kind of cool just to like look at that and be like, man, that's pretty pitiful.
That might be a good thing.
That might
be a good thing to take along next time you do one of these presentations. I
true,
started
yeah.
with that.
So, I went into this knowing that, okay, this would be really cool to do. My whole life revolves around this instrument. So, yeah, okay, I'll give that a shot. Try making one. I had no idea what I was getting myself into,
It's intricate. It's delicate.
Extremely. And I think that's part of, Anya's strength as a teacher was that she wouldn't let me move on to the next step until it was right. This is not something where you can take shortcuts. And I'm still learning that now. Like, it's something where I haven't stopped learning. I'm going to continue learning until I'm dead, it's not something that comes quickly. And it's
still work together, too,
yeah. So, it's tough to put into words just how intense the whole process is.
Can you think of a tip or a trick that she taught you that you could not have seen coming?
Well, just something as simple as, if you're making, say you're joining plates. So the back plate right here, this is two pieces of wood that you join together. Something as simple as putting those up to a light and holding a ruler on that flat spot to get a sense for where there are bumps, where you need to take wood off to get those things to join up perfectly. Just a little trick like that. It's something that I would never have known had.
Now, Anya, how many violins have you made by now?
I've made 10, and the 10th instrument is in the exhibit over there.
Oh,
So,
cool, yeah.
yeah.
By the way, if you haven't seen the exhibition yet, it really, really ought to see it. It's amazing. Those two characters on the end. who are talking now, did an amazing job of putting together this exhibit of traditional instruments made here in South Louisiana. How many have you made, Chris?
I'm also on my 11th one right now, so my 10th one is in the.
Passed you up.
No, my 10th one's in the exhibit, so we're both on number 10 and probably working on 11. Yeah.
So you're neck and neck.
Yep.
Now, Chris, I know that you partially grew up as a kid, enamored of the violin and taking every opportunity you could to visit violin players and makers. I know that we have some photographs of you in Lionel LUS house, who was one of the early violin makers. There were others. M.R. Entrepont was probably earlier. Did y'all find anybody earlier than that? I think.
Tina Scheck-Snyder was building fiddles in Crowley in the 60s, 70s. Born as Scheck-Snyder.
And M.R. was when?
Amar was building them in the 20s and 30s.
In the 20s and 30s, yeah.
Yeah, there's two
And
instruments.
those guys didn't have any kind of apprenticeship program. They had nobody to turn to. I mean, Amar's family members said he just kind of figured this out just from looking at them and looking inside. Lionel Lulu the same way.
Yeah.
Although I think Lionel worked with somebody. Didn't you tell me that?
He studied a lot. There were at the time Lionel was building, there were books that had been published available about violin making, so he studied this deeply.
And he also, they also did, the whole business, not just the woodworking, but the varnish and the glue and just every aspect of it.
Yep.
The violin, the modern violin, is the result of what evolved in 16th century, basically 16th century Italy with Guarneri and Amati and Stradivari, and they figured out that shape, and they figured out that thickness, and they figured out those bumps, and they figured out the whole what it was that enabled that resonating box to work most efficiently and effectively.
Yeah, the design of the violin hasn't changed in 300 years. And any of innovations that have been made, of which there have been very few that have stuck, I mean, the neck angle has changed a bit since the 1700s because we're playing in bigger venues now, need more projection, more sound. And certain components of the inside have changed a little bit. But in terms of the overall design, how it was laid out, circles have basically are what has, the basis of the
whole
design.
shebang, F-holes, purfling, everything.
Yeah, I mean, what else in the world can you think of, in terms of human built has not changed in 300 years? It's kind of phenomenal.
Yeah, all too often, we think, oh, no, I can improve on that.
Yeah.
It's like, no, it's good, right?
Yeah.
Just like it is. Don't improve on that.
There can't, honestly, there probably aren't improvements that can be made because the ones that are selling now for $3 million were built in the early to 1700s. So you want to try to model your stuff after those.
Now, both of you are musicians as well. You play the instrument.
Yep.
One of the things that I remember Lionel told me about working the wood was that it had a tone. Wood has a tone, and he would tap it.
Yeah, that's how I was taught too at school, tap tones. Yeah, so when you're like carving out, I told you the top and the back are carved plates, and when you're trying to kind of refine the thicknessing of the top, you have a top plate in your hand and you're tapping it in certain areas to get the pitch of that piece of wood.
There's no substitute for just a flat, good ear. You just have to be able to hear that. I remember working with Chris, editing recording projects, making CDs, producing CDs, and he would go through the song and he'd say, "Oh man, the bass player missed that note." I said, "Really? How can you hear that?" Well, if you have a musician's ear, you hear that. I remember Dewey Balfa up on stage. Halfway through a 45-minute set, he would tell the guitar player, "Your fourth string is flat." How do you hear that? Well, you hear that. Some people hear that. Most people don't, but some people do, and that's the kind of ear you have to have.
Yeah, it's really helpful to play the violin if you're going to build them. It's just, or set them up. It's just really, it's a helpful thing. It's kind of like being a mechanic of a car and knowing how to drive.
Now, do you play, huh? The accordion.
I play enough to entertain I play enough just to entertain myself, but mostly I play the drums,
Now, Larry plays. You play a little bit? Tina plays, Moisey doesn't play a lick. And he often says nobody wants him to do that in public. But he makes great accordions. So, there are some exceptions. But with something that's mechanical push, if you push the button, that note's going to come out right. That's one thing. But on a fiddle, you have that
no
sliding
frets
scale. So no frets.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to say, Chris, about the process?
I think one thing that's really cool is that fiddles and accordions are built totally differently. Like the approach that's taken when you're building an accordion versus a fiddle is like night and day. I remember Larry and I did a presentation at UL a couple years ago, and it was just he and I speaking to a class in the music program, and he spent 15 minutes talking about accordions, and I, talked about fiddles, and it really struck me that, with accordions, a lot of it you can lay it out and do production work pretty easily, build jigs and do stuff kind of repetitively. Fiddles, it's not done that way. It's all one at a time. Every piece is made with hand tools by hand, and I don't know. It's cool. They're very different.
They're really made in the moment and in response to what the wood is telling you and how.
Exactly.
Yeah, some.
I think each piece of wood is so different. So as you're working with that one piece, you kind of learn how how it carves differently than another piece that you might have worked on, and you agree with that? So I think that's the thing. If you're working on 2, 3, 4 of these at a time, you never really get that chance to sort of get that relationship with the wood and figure it out.
Yeah, it really is based on a relationship. Now, sometimes you can avoid a bunch of that if you make your fiddle with the top and bottom out of formica. But that photograph over there to the left of the Acadiana flag was made by Weddison Reed, who realized that why work that hard to thin a piece of wood if formica's already thin. Made a fiddle out of formica. It's in the exhibition, by the way. And it actually makes sound,
Yeah,
So this is the other thing.
Night.
Huh?
We played it last night.
There you go. The thing is, these instruments that you see on the other, and all, through the table, are really, really exquisitely crafted, artistically crafted instruments. But, we should also not forget that there were people who just wanted to make music so badly. They would have done anything to construct an object that would make predictable noise. That's all they wanted. The stories about cigar box fiddles with wire from the screen porch. It really is an amazing story about just being so driven to want to play and have no money till you just make something that would make noise. Let's turn to the accordion makers. Start with Tina. Maybe Tina, you could talk a little bit about first your relationship with Mark. Mark Savoy, we have to say, can we be honest? Mark Savoy pretty much reinvented the diatonic accordion.
That's what I would really like to talk about. But just a little bit about my background. I was born and raised in Fremont, California, and at an early
Welcome
age,
home.
Yes, I got here as fast as I could. But when my parents finally let me quit piano lessons, I picked up a guitar and a mandolin and started discovering traditional music, first with the Carter family, and I just fell in love with this heartfelt music. And then fast forward, I was living in Seattle in 1978, and Mark Savoy and Dewey and Rodney Balfa did a concert up there. And I was playing old-time music and bluegrass bands. There was a really wonderful, still is, square dance scene up there. When I heard that music, my life was ruined for the first time. I immediately asked myself, what is it about these people, what they eat, how they live, what they do, that makes them make this beautiful music? And I didn't understand a word of French at the time, but when Rodney sang, it tore my soul apart.
Yeah, well, by the way, I want to say that your reaction is so gratifying, because a lot of people just heard the music and they said, how could I make that music? But what you just said was, who are these people, and what is it about them that makes them make that music? That's a wonderful extra step.
Exactly. So that's when I met Mark. He invited me. He was very open. He wanted to share his experiences, and I first visited in 1981, and I went back home to Seattle, and every morning I'd wake up and say, how can I get back to Louisiana? I got to get back there for longer. I was only here for 2 weeks. I got to hear Maurice Berza at the Blue Goose, that's no longer there. And I said, finally, I found the real thing. And, you know, I'd listened to a couple records. I had a Dennis McGee record, which made no sense to me at all. It was so advanced. I listened and listened and listened for about 15 years, and then I tried to do that. But anyway, so I met Mark, and he found out that I had some woodworking experience up in Seattle. First, when I was in high school, I put together a dulcimer kit, and then a friend of mine helped me make a dulcimer from scratch. And then in Seattle, I took a little guitar making class, which I learned how to sharpen tools and how to use tools, hand tools. And so when I met Mark,
So you had a head start a little bit.
yeah, so I knew a little bit about woodworking and sharpening chisels. Actually, when I arrived to work with Mark, the chisel he was using was sharpened with a grinding stone. And it was the same chisel he used to operate on toilets. And I said, Mark, you know, a good sharp chisel would really help you out. So I ordered a couple of chisels, and I sharpen them for him to this day. But anyway, I wanted to share a little bit about Mark's passion, how Mark's passion came about for building accordions. When he was a young child, there was a tenant farmer on his father's property named Hiram Corville. And as a young child, he heard this sound drifting across the field. And he asked this man, next time you come to visit, would you please bring this contraption? You know, he didn't know what it looked like or anything. So anyway, about that time, Mark's father was a music fanatic. He couldn't play the accordion, but he was an absolute music fanatic. Loved the accordion. His father and brother both played fiddles. In fact, Mark's grandfather played fiddles with Dennis McGee, who was also a tenant farmer on Mark's grandfather's land. But both Mark and his father really fell in love with the accordion. So anyway, Mark's father would have these house dances. Hiram Corville at one point moved to town. He gave up farming and went to town to become a carpenter. And the house that he lived in was made out of yellow cypress. It was kind of run down, but it was still structurally sound. So they moved the house to the back of Mark's father's house, and that became the outdoor kitchen where all these music parties would come about. This is where Mark really became infatuated with the accordion style of his mentors. The main ones were this man, Hiram Corville, and Flaubert Fruget, which was an uncle of Wade Fruget, the fiddler. And so Mark, at these parties, would just sit at these old men's feet and just watch them like a hawk all night. And so Hiram came to Mark's father and said, you know, I noticed him, you know, he just stares at us the whole time while we're playing. Maybe you ought to get him a fiddle or an accordion. So since Mark's father was really infatuated with the accordion, he asked Mark later on, would you like to have an accordion? So he said, I guess so. So at 12 years old, this accordion arrives from Sears Roebuck. It was a little Honer. And because Mark had sat at these old men's feet for all these house parties, he knew the tunes. And he knew when he had an accordion, he would be able to play them. So his accordion arrived. It was dove hunting season. Mark's father asked him, "You want to go dove hunting with me?" And he said, "No, I want to stay here with my accordion." So he got it out, pressed on all the buttons, and immediately played J'ai passé devant ta porte. And Mark's mother heard this, and she said, "Wait, that sounds just like Iram." No, Iram wasn't there. Mark's father comes back, says, "What's Iram doing here?" Said, "No, Iram's not here. Go see who's playing the accordion." And it was Mark. And Mark's father's eyes got as big as a 50-cent piece, eyes wide open, mouth hanging open, couldn't speak for a few minutes. And from that day on, Mark turned in from a clumsy young man who couldn't do anything to this is my son who can play the accordion. And so it went from there. The Honer was really the best instrument of the time according to his mentor, Iram. And the really good players liked those accordions best. But the pre-war accordions were really coveted. And that's what these are modeled after.
The Sterling and Monarch and Eagle brands were the ones that
Sterling
were
and the Monarch.
pre-World War II. And afterwards, they kept bringing them, and they were all, they had all been painted black.
Yes.
Because it wasn't particularly great wood, pine or whatever. And later, when Mark eventually started making the accordions, by the way, you might want to talk about the story about why he started making accordions, because he had gotten so good at playing that he told me my instrument wouldn't do what I was asking it to do.
Yeah, it wouldn't keep up.
It couldn't keep up.
So he started, actually, one day his spring on his accordion broke, and his father said, "Well, I remember old men like Amédée Ardouin talking about how they would repair their springs." So neither of them knowing anything about accordions, well, let's open it up and look at it. He said that they used something like a pin, like a diaper pin. And so Mark raided his mother's pin cushion and found one and fixed the accordion. Word spread like wildfire. Mark Savoie is repairing accordions. Well, this news spread all the way to Oberlin, where this guy showed up with a piano key accordion at his home and wanted him to fix it. Well, he opened that up, and he saw that these reeds were not Honer reeds. They were something completely different. It was a beautiful modern instrument. And so that led to, there was a black man also attended on the farm that told Mark about this old man, Hoya Guidry, who was a great accordion player. Turns out to be Amédée Ardouin's teacher. Anyway, he went to visit him. This tenant knew this guy was still alive. So he went to visit him. He had an old Monarch accordion. And he started playing the Eunice two-step exactly like Amédée. And it was so close to Amédée's playing that he told him that it sounded just like Amédée Ardouin. He shook his head and said, "No, Amédée Ardouin sounds like me." So anyway, he told him about this black man who lived in Cecilia, who had tried tuning reeds. He tuned, and they were called musics back then. And he was he was finally figuring out that when you scratch the reed, it changes the tune. So anyway, that was the time, the first thought that something could be done to the Honer to make it sound better. The sound of the Monarchs was really beautiful, but the action, really good players, the action was not as good as the Honers. They still preferred the Honers. But the Monarch and Sterlings were an innovation from the ones before that had the reeds all on one plate, and they were made from an inferior alloy. So the Monarchs had the steel reeds, which had beautiful tone. So so when Mark was about 17, he saw his first handmade accordion made by a man named Sidney Brown.
We have one here.
All right. Sidney Brown was from Lake Charles, and Mark went to a house party to play one time, and this man said, "Hey, you're a great accordion player for your age, but you need a better instrument. My son plays a steel guitar in Sidney Brown's band, and I have one of his accordions in the car." So he showed him this accordion, and that night he didn't sleep. He thought he probably heard wrong, that somebody actually made an accordion. He couldn't wrap his mind around that. Couldn't sleep all night. So he came back home and he told his father, he said, "I saw an accordion that somebody made, And so the search went on. I know this is going too long, but anyway, Mark's father, they had an oil company, did a lease on their land. This guy from Texas who knew about this international trade mart in Houston. So Mark ended up going over there. He knew that if he could find some better reeds, that he could make an instrument that would far superior to either the Honer or the Monarch. And so he went to the trademark. He found out, he thought that these reeds must be made in Germany, but he was wrong. He found out through his search at the international trademark that they're actually from Italy. So he got some names and addresses. A few weeks later, the postman came up to the door with this letter from Italy, an airmail letter from Italy. "We can supply you reeds and bellows." And so that was the beginning. He got the reeds. He was already building accordions at that time. He started in 1960 in his father's outdoor kitchen. And then what he had to do, he had to redesign based on these reeds. There were different size and shape. So he went to work with a few pressure gauges and his mother's vacuum cleaner, and he did some tests, and he came up with the measurements. So really,
I'm surprised that Mark Southwell also studied engineering.
yes, actually he has a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering, but he knew he couldn't do that. But anyway, so Mark really is responsible for the measurements of today's modern accordions that are based around these superior reeds of, these Italian reeds.
And also, if I can add, he also discovered the value of better wood, reasoning that if violins are better with maple and spruce and good wood that sometimes were imported from Germany and all over the place, it stands to reason if you're dealing with some sort of resonating box of some sort, it ought to sound better if it has good wood. And when he started making accordions with maple, beautiful curly maple and bird's eye maple or these gorgeous woods, of course he didn't paint them. Of course he wouldn't have painted them. That would have been. But everybody wanted one of these black ones.
That's right.
Because that's the ones that were good. The Monarchs and
They
the
were black.
Honers were black. They were black because they weren't very good wood. They just paint them. So he was trying to sell these things, and people would say, "Well, no, I want a black one." He said, "Why would I paint it black? It's beautiful,
Yeah, that was
I mean, look,
that was a real hard sell.
look. Would you paint this black?
Yeah.
Of course not, right?
That was, well, the first guy that brought him a piece of wood, well, Mark was building them out of pine 2x4s, and he brought him a piece of cherry because he liked the weight. He thought that Mark's accordions were a little lightweight. So really, in accordion building, the main thing that produces the superior sound are the superior reeds and the efficiency of the reed mounts. Really, you were talking about Formica. You actually probably could build an accordion out of Formica, and it could sound very good and play very well because it had really good reeds and the action on the keyboard. So again, you were talking about being able to play the instrument. Well, Mark has been trying to build the accordion of his dreams. So because he is a master player, that's what he's moving towards.
That's what drove him. Yeah.
And he's still making improvements. He's still thinking about how to make improvements.
Well, by the way, I just want to add to the story about Black. He would not paint them. He started just, I guess, as a Mark being who he is, he started dyeing them with food coloring. He made a series of pink ones,
Still
and then
does.
a series of green ones, and then a series of blue ones that he would varnish over. And one day, it was a joke. He would not make a black accordion. One day I went to his shop. And he says, "Hey, look what I made." And I look over there, and it was black. I said, "Oh my God, what did you do? You made a black accordion?" Go see. I looked up there. He said, "It's ebony."
Oh, all right.
Just as a joke. Let's let Moisey talk about how did you get interested in doing this at all? I know Moisey was a master carpenter, built houses all over Abbeville and a lot of places, and he's built furniture. But how did you get interested in accordions?
One night we was
Put it close.
okay. One night we was at the Liberty Theater, about 20 years ago, and a fella came and demonstrated an accordion he had made and everything. So I was looking at it, and I said to myself, while he was doing that, I can sure build one, like that. So when I left, I told my wife, I said, I can build an accordion like that. She said, oh no. I said, well, I think I can. So they had a fiddle player that was named Nelson Longe from Abbeville, and him and Mark was good friends. So I had never met Mark. So I asked him, I said, could you bring me and see Mark and talk to him? He said, I sure will. So we got over there, and I talked to Mark, and I said, could you teach me how to build an accordion? Well, he says, they got people over there. No, I say, I'd like for you to teach me how. So he said, okay. So he gave me the bass side of the accordion that was cracked. He said, go home and build this. So I went home and I built it.
That's
And,
some teacher.
And I go there and I look at it. I brought a bellow with him and everything. And I look at it and everything. Then from Delcom, I drive to Eunice. And if he was busy, I wouldn't talk to him about this. I'd turn around, I'd look what he was doing, and I'd go home. And I kept on doing this, and I kept on doing it. And finally, one day, I said, Mark, I want to ask you something. He says, what? I said, you never told me if I'm doing the right thing or what. I need to know. You need to tell me something. He said, let me tell you something. I know people that's been fooling with accordion 5 or 6 years. They can't do what you're doing. I said, well, that answered my question, So I went home and I kept on and I put the reeds in it. And I'm not music inclined, but I bring it somewhere and I have it tuned and everything. And then I came home and I played. That was the first time I ever played an accordion. But
You were by yourself in your house?
how's that?
You were by yourself in your house?
Yes. And everybody says, why don't you learn how to play it? I say, well, when I'll be old, I'll sit on the porch in the back and I'm going to learn how to play it.
He's not old yet.
Oh, no. I'll never be able to play the accordion.
Well, that's okay. Moise also is a master boat builder. So you can imagine if he could build something that won't leak. He ought to be able to build an accordion. So you learned from Mark like this, and did you work with Tina at all?
Yeah, Tina was there too. But it's just something I love to do. I love to work with wood, and it's when I grew up, we wouldn't play with wood. We pick up cotton and all that good stuff. So it's a whole lot easier to play with the wood than when go in the field and pick up cotton. Yeah.
How many have you made by now?
About 70.
70?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
How about you, Tina?
Oh, well, I never really built one completely by myself.
Oh, so
I
you
know
were-
how to do all but we kind of have a division of labor. Like Mark cuts out the pieces.
It's like a medieval workshop.
I can put the frames together. I put the corners in the frames. I put base boxes together, all the parts of the base boxes, reeds, glue the frames to the bellows, all that stuff. He does the varnishing, all the varnishing in the hot sun. He doesn't ask me to do that. He waits till it's about 95 and 98% humidity, and he stands in the sun for 4 hours and does it. And then he also does the action on the keyboard. He's showed me, how to do it, but he's the master of that.
So Moise,
And also the tuning.
Moise, you kind of went past Mark. Past Tina and Mark. You make your own all by yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, I make my own all by myself. You're right. But it's fun, To me, when I'm playing with lumber or building an accordion or something, everything is so calm. I'm happy and everything. That's why I fool with the wood.
There you go. Let's get to Larry before we have to give up the.
Yeah.
Larry-
I just
Yeah.
wanted to add one thing. Really, for me, what Mark has been for me is mostly a cultural guide, because I just landed in this place where I was surrounded by exactly what I wanted to find out. I wanted to know these people. I wanted to learn their music. And so and I got to build accordions and make a good living in the meantime. So
Life is good. So Larry Miller has been making accordions for a long time. How many have you made, you think, just off the top of your
In
head?
excess of 1,237 years, but that's not
But
the highest. I'm sure
now,
Mark and maybe Junior Morton has surpassed that. But
when we talk about we're talking about apprenticeship and working, learning, and passing it on. You have an apprenticeship program that's probably as organized or more organized than most.
Yeah.
You actually, I just noticing you have a list of all the people who have actually learned from you. There are 15. You're number 15. And
Number
he was
15.
telling me earlier that he has a minimum of 240 hours of contact time.
Correct.
This is almost, it's no accident that he was also a high school teacher. So
Yeah. Well,
he's got this notion of contact hours and
that
credits.
did
and,
help out, having been a teacher, and you're
sure.
a teacher as well. So,
who
I
did
think
you learn
understand.
from?
Huh?
Who did you learn from?
Well, I learned from Mark Savoy, Sean Mouton, Charlie Ortego, Randy Falcon, and a couple of others.
Initially, it was
I
probably-
didn't have a steady teacher. I just because for some reason it just didn't quite work out the way I would have liked, time-wise, and time for them and time for me. So I just went to each one periodically and just picked their brains and just continued working and improving. And anyway, when I finished my first one with my oldest son, Jay's dad, who now been deceased since 2001, that accordion didn't sound so great, and I thought there was something wrong, and I realized that what was happening later after I built my second one for my brother right here, my oldest brother, who was an accordion player, and it was in the reed blocks, but that's where I was making a mistake, not realizing because I hadn't had an instruction, and that kind of led me to think, well, you know, if somebody had a good apprenticeship program, you could really learn completely, and I think you understand that too by now. So I kind of promised myself someday I might try to teach other people, and so that's when this guy named Gary Powell from Minneapolis, who is a multitasking musician. He plays all kind of instruments. He had an early Cajun band in Minneapolis, St. Paul, called the Bone Tones, Bonetonnes, and very good musician. He wanted to learn how to play, how to build. So he called me up, and I said, "Yeah, I think we can do it." He came down with a tabletop from his dad. His dad was a low-wage worker that didn't have much, and when he was in a nursing home or whatever, convalescing, they were dividing up the property, and all he got was there were a few pieces of furniture, and he had a coffee table with a piece of walnut top this thick and about like that. He took the legs off and packed that in his car, came down to my shop, and he spent about 6 hours a day for 6 weeks, and after he would put in about 6 hours in the shop, he'd go meet Mark Sabo or somebody and go fishing or whatever and play music, and he that's when I found out about how many hours, but he didn't quite finish because he spent too much time playing music and fishing. But anyway, he was a good craftsman, right? But he actually went home with the accordion more or less finished. He just hadn't put the reeds in and tuned it. He knew what to do. I taught him enough where he could finish it at home. So he went home with an accordion built from his dad's walnut coffee table top.
Wow.
And that was an interesting story, I thought. Well,
green accordion, recycled accordion.
Yeah, recycled. Unlike string instruments, when the internal body of a string instrument like fiddle, guitar, mandolin is a vibrating acoustic box where, correct me if I'm wrong, the back is flexing, the neck is doing that, and the top is bouncing up and down. And that's kind of an oversimplification, but anyway, but the
Actually,
whole box
it's actually a magnification.
The whole box is participating in sound production. It's an acoustic, it's a fixed box that is participating in sound production. That's again an simplification, but in our case, in their case, they have to have a certain kind of wood, a certain shape. We can use apple crate lumber if you can still find that, or we can use anything on the outside, because the sound produced inside the accordion is produced in the reed blocks, and the sound that goes into the accordion is actually killed by a corrugated surface, the bellows. It's immediately killed. The inside, what goes on the inside, what comes out of the flapper hits your ear is all that matters, and that's what happens. The internal sound is immediately killed because and then plus it's not a fixed box, it's continually changing. So the exterior wood that you see has zero effect on the sound quality, whereas the exterior wood you see here is extremely important for sound quality. In addition, they have to be very precise in everywhere they go when building. We have to be precise in the fingerboard, and particularly the slides and the stop slides, as we call them, the gate valves, and in certain parts of the fingerboard too, you have to be pretty precise. Outside of that, in the reed blocks, each reed has its own little acoustic chamber. So the kind of wood that you see here, and the angle and the depth is what's very important in sound production. So you have to be a bit precise here and on the fingerboard and the slides. The rest of the accordion you can kind of you can slide and fudge a little bit. It doesn't really matter.
Although
So-
the tightness
Pardon?
of it will affect
Yes,
how
you have
efficient
to,
it is.
It has to be airtight.
Right.
That's an important point.
Which is
but-
one of the reasons why better bellows
Yeah,
helped
yeah.
the accordion.
I don't have a whole lot we can show you from where you're sitting, but afterwards, if we have
Y'all
time,
come
you
up
can
to-
come by the table, examine. One of the one thing I didn't know about, that I hadn't learned from anybody when I first built my first one, I had to correct it later, was the big reeds have a tendency to, the reed tongue swings too far and it hits bottom. And you've got to gouge out, if you can see those gouges, and give room for that reed tongue to swing. And so in my second one, I was able to correct that, and so that's what made me think if somebody would have taught me that, I wouldn't have made that mistake. You see, but anyway, as it turned out, it takes us about, on average, about if you built one by itself and did a good job, it would probably cost you 150 to 175 hours if you worked fairly efficiently. And because there's so many parts in an accordion, there's more parts in the accordion than any other musical instrument, basically. All these little parts have to be dealt with. I mean, all kind of little things that you have to build. These things are rather difficult to build. Just imagine. Now, there's a technique that is not quite as peculiar as it looks, but all of these things have to be built to fit the reeds, and different reed brands of different length, different keys from a G, as longest reeds, to the F sharp is the shortest. So you have to build these reed blocks according to the key that you have and the brand that you're using.
Do you get a lot of, by the way, since you mentioned that, do you get a lot of orders for different keys, and mostly C and D and?
C is the most popular for Cajun music.
But
and,
do you get occasional orders for odd keys?
Well, yeah, you'll have some.
Somebody's losing his voice maybe and sort of.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen some people play E's, and I built one for each one of my 6 children, the 12 grandkids, and now I've got only 2 great-grands that I've satisfied so far because I'm about the end of my building rope. But I built 2 for Jay because he's ambidextrous. I built him a righty and a lefty.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And then because Blake was so prolific, I built him 5, a C, D, a B flat, an F, and a C sharp. Yeah. And then Jay built him one too to
Well, B flat,
go
C,
out
and
the
C
road
sharp
so
is
he
pretty
could,
skinny, narrow changes there.
So anyway, and I built one for my brother and different cousins and what have you. But
Now, by the
It's-
way, you were saying that the wood doesn't matter, but look, when is this pretty?
that's the one.
It matters. It's pretty. I mean, if it's at least beautiful.
Yeah,
It's
this is
amazing.
built from the bird-eye maple, the sunken logs in Superior Lake out of Ashland, Wisconsin. And it doesn't make the accordion sound better, but it's got a beautiful story to
There you
it.
go. And it's beautiful.
Right. This is for my oldest great-grandchild. Her name is Amelie, Kendall's daughter. And then I built the black one for her little brother, Alcide. So anyway, that's coming along. So we can talk about those.
Y'all come up
Decide
later
to come by.
and take a look. Yeah. He's going to change the battery. Let me ask Jay, what was it like to start working with your grandpa? I see that this Powell guy beat you by 1.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I guess just growing up around the shop, I would go over to his house after school, in elementary school, and I'd always beg to go in the shop to see what the guys were doing. And my mom then would fuss, go in there, but don't get in anybody's way, So, yeah, don't lose any fingers. And I would sweep, after elementary school. And then as I got older, more responsibilities, more jobs and tasks around the shop, So
So you started piecemealing work to you, like do this part, do this,
Yeah.
kind of like what Tina was talking about.
Yeah, exactly. I started out, like sweeping the floor, then making the spoons and the T5s in the back, and then slowly, got to just build specific one parts at a time. Because, like Anya and Chris and them were saying about fiddles, they do one at a time piecework. Well, basically, our accordion factory is just that, like a manufacturing place. We manufacture 1,000 corners to build the next 100 accordions, or then we'll build 200 reed blocks in advance for the year's worth of accordions, and that'll take us a weekend to a whole week just to build 100 or so reed blocks, So that's basically how I got into it as a job, and then later on started a labor of love type. More fall into it because I like doing it versus it just being a job working for my grandfather,
Now, how many have you made by now?
I think I'm around 25 or 30 on my own. I did about a year and a half, 2 years after I graduated from LSUE. Just working on my own. Grandpa retired. I was working out of his shop.
When he was employed, so.
Now, violins don't have names attached to them. I mean, we attach them to the name of the person who made them. Stradivari, Guarneri, Burgess. Segura, there's a Segura, a Lionel Lula. But accordions have brands. Mark Savoy's brand was Acadian. Moisey's is Vermilion, because he's from Vermilion Parish. And yours is
Boncajam.
Boncajam. And did you?
I just carried his
You carried
name,
on. And did you have? Vincent. Vincent. Yeah.
That came from the Monarch. Mark got that idea from the Monarch. It said Monarch, steel reeds. And so that's where that came from. There was the little scroll work and it was painted on. But he got his first were painted
And
on, but then he got the engraving machine. So that's actually where that whole trademark thing came from the Monarch.
Yeah. Now there's Creoles and there's what's Errol Verrett's?
I'm not sure. Errol Verrett.
Everett was, I think it was.
Evangeline.
Evangeline. So people have been coming up with some pretty imaginative names that are connected to the culture, connected to the area, huh? Dick Richard was Pointe Noire, which is the cultural name for the neighborhood he was from. The star. Oh yeah, this is a. Wait. This is Sidney Brown. No, we don't have one. The old accordions, the Sterling was one of the ones that came from Germany. And Valentin Lopez was, I think, one of the first 2 or 3 that Sidney Brown, Valentin Lopez, and who was the other one?
Well, Mark Savoy and Shine Mouton,
And Shine
Charlie
Mouton.
Artigo.
Charlie Artigo. But Valentin Lopez started making them, and he would put Starling, not Sterling, Starling in flagrant imitation, suggestion. But interestingly, you all heard of Nathan Abshire, the great Nathan Abshire? His accordion, that distinctive accordion that he played, was a Starling from Valentin Lopez. So they sounded good.
Yeah. So this Sidney Brown was built in the early 50s. I mean, this was probably 51 or 52. He started 1950, and there's a gentleman here by the name of Gray back here. He bought this one in New Orleans after Katrina, and this is one made in the late 70s. Some of the last ones that Sidney made, and this is the second one I built for my brother. Second one, and I built it for my oldest brother, and he passed away, and
Oh, that's yours.
that's his.
Let's see. It says Vincent, yeah. And usually it says, I can't tell. Yeah, made in Louisiana. Yeah.
One of the things about accordion building that maybe is not so well known is that because there's so many parts, you're kind of foolish if you just go, once you learn, you're foolish if you just go build one at a time, because it takes so long to set your saw blade or your drill press or
To gear
whatever
up for that
for
part,
each
right?
part. So when you do cut one part, you cut 30, 40, 50.
And if you got
And
somebody,
stack it.
and if you got somebody you trust, you let them cut all 100.
Yeah, that's right. So when we build these, we'd build like 200 at a time.
Yeah.
And then we'd park them on a shelf, and we had some for several years, you know.
That was one of the first things he asked me.
Hand him the microphone.
So one of the first things he asked me was, how many you plan on making her? He said, because it ain't worth learning just to do one accordion. There's so much into it.
Now, Moisey, you make one at a time. No. 10 or 12. Okay. Okay.
All the names, Cormier, Toby Cormier, I helped him build an accordion.
Fred Cormier.
And I saw his son Louis.
Yeah, that's right.
His name is Cormier. A lot of people that name it. And he began to build quite a few of them.
And so how did you get into this?
I started off on a little Honer accordion, and I called Mr. Larry one day and said, there's something, it sounded, it was wet tuned like a Zydeco. I said, I want it to be more like Cajun sound. He said, yeah, we could tune it. And he said, I could put one of my fingerboards and bass boxes on it too and be easier to play. And I sat there and watched him tune it, and it was something just intriguing about it. I said, one day I want to learn to build one. And he was real busy. I think he had maybe 3 or 4 apprentices at one time when I checked with him, too many to take on another one at the time. And my wife's uncle, Irvin Lejean, he builds accordions in Lake Charles. And he got me started, and he gave me all his patterns and everything up front when we got started. And because of some of the health issues he had, he wasn't able to help me finish. So I called Mr. Larry, and of course, like he was saying, you can't explain over the phone or text message, you just have to show somebody. So he said, stop what you're doing, bring everything you got to me, and he helped me finish the first one. And then I picked up the apprenticeship from there on, you know.
And you made how many now?
That's my third one.
That's your third
yeah,
one?
I got like 8 of them at home I started on. And
Have any of you younger ones made any changes or innovations or?
no, as we go on, I ask them a lot of questions. Have you moved the axle rod? You know, have you tried? I ask him a bunch of questions. Have he, if he's like changed anything worth doing? He said, you know, no.
Now, Jay, I understand you have 2 apprentices yourself.
Yes, I taught Mr. Jesse Brown and Greg Brown, I guess, who are distant cousins and are both related distantly down the family line of Sidney Brown. Mr. Greg, he and I definitely taught him more about accordions. Now, Jesse Brown, he and I built several hundred reblocks together. He did most of his accordion work with my grandpa, and Jesse and I teamed up and built a lot of reblocks. Just a really tremendous amount for him to stockpile for his future and mine as well, you know. And we still have some of those weekend projects going on between us. Just keeping up with the reblock building.
I'm a little astonished at some of the large numbers and the prolific. Mark said he limited himself to about 60 a year or something like that.
Yeah, I think at one time we were building about 4 to 6 a month.
Yeah, 4 to 6 a month.
We
But I mean, you have to wonder how many people are playing these darn things that they keep cranking them out, and they're not sitting in your shops or shelves or whatever. Yeah. The violins, I guess you can keep up. I mean, is there a huge draw, a huge demand for them, or?
Pretty big waiting list, huh?
Yeah, so I'm not building a lot right now.
Running a store.
Yeah, I opened a shop downtown, and then just the ages of my kids
You want
takes
to
a
know
lot of
how
time.
cool a place Lafayette is? It's got a shop downtown that's completely devoted to violins and string instruments. How
Yeah.
cool is that?
I wish there was an accordion shop downtown. How cool would that be?
There you go.
It'd be amazing. Yeah. But I have a waiting list, and that's just mostly the result of, you know, the fact that it takes me a long time to get to them. But I have like 3 or 4 people who.
You know,
Want
I ordered a violin from Lionel LeLeux. Picked the plate when it was still a plank,
Yeah.
and 15 years later I got it.
See, that makes me feel better.
I'm sorry I said that.
And,
Anybody have any questions? We have just a couple of minutes for
Do the different keys of accordions have different sizes on the reed block?
Can you repeat the question?
All right, like, okay, you make accordion. Wow, I got a soft voice.
I've got to hear it.
Oh, yeah, okay. I'll try. You know, the accordions come in different keys.
Yes, they can come in 12 different keys if you wish. And
Okay.
each one, but we have like 2 basic finger patterns that we use. So if you want to play, like this accordion is a C, plays in C and G, first finger pattern, second finger pattern. And if it was a D, it'd play in D and A respectively, and a B flat would play in B flat and F respectively. So you basically learn 2 finger patterns. You can do a third and a fourth, but it's not too very common and mechanically awkward to do it. So the comfortable 2 finger patterns gives you the 2 keys that you can play in, so you have different accordions.
He was wondering if the reed blocks came in different sizes according to
We have to make the reed blocks according to the reeds. The reeds are common in a set size, and we have to build the reed blocks to fit the reeds,
Okay.
depending on the key and the brand. And at this spot right here on the table, on this craft piece of Italian craft paper, I've got all of the parts that we order from Italy: bellows and a reed set, and the bellows straps, and some of the associated the 10 buttons and associated metal parts that we get from Italy. And that's because the reed making is extremely technical. Bellow making is not quite so technical, but a heck of a lot of work. It's 92% labor and 8% raw materials, and but reeds are very, very technical. And at different people have asked at times, how come we don't make our own reeds and bellows? Well, I can answer you by telling you that I went to Italy twice in the accordion making region, and it's a small area. And there's about 15 accordion factories in that Castelvenato area and Osimo Stazione. And in that area, every single accordion maker, not a one makes their own bellows and reeds. And we make our own fingerboards and they don't. All the fingerboard parts are made by a specialty machine shop. All of the bass box metal parts are all made by a special machine shop. They buy them and drop them in and screw them in. So reeds are just too technical for anybody in USA to ever catch up with these Italians.
Let me ask you the violin makers. Y'all make every single piece?
Yeah, we pretty much make every single piece. Yeah, and except the strings, and then except for like the chin rest and the tailpiece, that type of thing. But everything else is 100% made by hand, and then in our case with hand tools. We're not using bandsaws, drill press, joiners, and even the joint of the back plates is done by hand with a big plane.
I remember talking about tailpieces. I forgot who would, maybe it was Warner Shakespeare or somebody who had carved Antarctica carved one out of a bone. Oh, yeah. Out of a shin bone. It was like, wow, that's pretty cool. Yes, you had it.
I just was wondering if there is a signature somewhere on the violins. Where is it? Is there a standard place, or do you get to choose?
So for a violin, there's a label on the inside, and it's in here. You look in the bass. This is the bass side F hole. These are the F holes, and there's a piece of paper in there that has a name, year built, and place built. That's what we do.
Yeah, I mean, you have to be careful because some of these things are, imitation. Mark Savoy famously said one time that Stradivari, in his lifetime, made about 300 violins, 3,000 of which can be found in Louisiana. Yeah, so, you look in there and you see Stradivari, say, oh my God, I have a $100,000 instrument.
So, quick question for Chris. I heard Anya has gone to Indiana. Are you planning to go and study more, or are you just going to learn from her?
I would eventually love to go to, if y'all were here for Joel Poutz's section this morning, he talked about how there are a couple of 2-week-long sessions that happen over those, usually in the summertime, different parts of the country where they'll focus on either repair work, on setup work, or, just wherever you're at on your instrument that you're making at that point. I would love to go to a couple of things like that, but at this point, have too much going on here. I can't really leave for 2 years at a time, but
He's got a full-time job. And yep, he's got 2 full-time jobs, and one of them, I would tackle him on the way to the plane if he tried to get away, because he's the archivist at the Center for Acadian Creole Folklore. Anybody else have anything? Yeah. Yeah. Larry just said that most of his end up out of state, although I'm sure some of them. Australia and Germany, as well as here. Yeah. Marks go all over the place too. Yeah. Mosey, where you?
How that happened is, the resurgence of Cajun music happened largely because in 1964, the Newport Folk Festival, Cajuns were exposed to the rest of the world, and then also
the rest of the world were exposed to us.
Yeah, and a filmmaker named Les Blank came down here in 1967, did the documentary film Spend It All, and then people started coming here. ABC, NBC wanted to know who these people were.
Yeah, and it's been there's been some good sides, there's been some weird sides. Mark Savoy also famously said one time in answer to a reporter's question, are you sorry that the Cajuns have been discovered? And he said, I'm sorrier that the Cajuns discovered themselves. But I mean, there's been some weird sides and just put pressure. A lot of our musicians, for example, nowadays, they're not playing here because they're playing in Santa Fe or somewhere else.
Yeah, when I first came here, there weren't that many Cajun bands that traveled. People like Dewey Balfa, he would go out, but he worked for a living and played on the weekends.
Mosey, where did you? By the way, there's an excellent bumper sticker. Real musicians have day jobs. Where do your accordions end up?
I got some in London, some in Canada, and some in France.
And here.
And over here.
Yeah. Well, it's not a surprise when you realize that there's actually a band called the Edinburgh Playboys. So yeah, I know. What about the violins? Lower output, but where do they end up?
I've got one in Nova Scotia, in Clare, Nova Scotia, one in New York. All the rest of them are down here.
Anybody playing any of them in symphonies or something?
Mine, I have a few here. I have one in Seattle. There's one in Galveston. Yeah, just kind of all over.
Cool. We should pull the plug. It's 15 till. Thank you so much for your wonderful attention, and thank you, panel, for what an amazing description. Thank you so much.